This was Joe Biden's first overseas trip since he took the presidency in January. He was at the G7 in the UK. He was here in Brussels for the NATO summit on Monday, and then on Tuesday a bilateral summit with the European Union. And China was at the center of all of this. It was not really a surprise to hear that. China featured more heavily in the statement following the G7 than it had done since 1989, when the G7 summit took place 1 month after the Tiananmen Square crackdown. We did see quite strong language on Hong Kong, quite strong language on Xinjiang, and for the first time, the Taiwan issue made it into a G7 statement. Following that, the NATO summit was here in Brussels on Monday. Now, just to set a bit of context here, last year was the first time that China had made any appearance in a NATO statement following a summit, and it was just one line. To contrast, it took up about 3 paragraphs this time, which NATO characterized China as a systemic challenge the first time. At a press conference following the NATO summit, the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg described China, with its use of technology and modern AI and things like that, as potentially changing the nature of modern warfare. Now, this was a big leap from where NATO was just a couple of years ago, and Biden rounded that off with a visit to the European Commission on Tuesday, at which he met with European Union leaders.
Do you view this as the West banding together to confront China? And what were the overarching themes that you saw come out of these 3 summits and meetings?
Well, I think if you think back to last week when Joe Biden was on the tarmac at the airport taking off for Europe, he said that he was asked what was what was he hoping to achieve, and he said he wanted to show China and Putin that the US and the EU are tight. So this was as much of a rhetorical exercise as it was actionable. The main aim here, the expressed aim, was to show that there is an alliance, that there is that Biden is rebuilding this coalition. Largely, the biggest factor in US foreign policy these days is China. So Biden has been on the road trying to whip up support for this effort to counter China. So I think this coalition building exercise was relatively successful. I think that he can go away thinking that these were good first steps. There will be more to come, I think. But the mission was to show the rest of the world that America is back after 4 years of isolationism to the multilateral table. And I think that's fairly well been achieved.
And what's Beijing's reaction been to the US cozying up to the EU?
They're not happy, of course, after the G7, after the NATO summit, and after the EU Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Zhao Lijian. He accused essentially the United States of trying to poison ties between China and the other parties involved in these meetings. Now, the Chinese will perhaps look at this as a first step, as I said, the United States is trying to rebuild a transatlantic alliance to tackle China. And some of the language suggested that China maybe suspected that the EU was less forceful or less fulsome in its direct accusations towards China, and that would be fair to say. It said that the EU is not a rival. The EU and China are not systemic rivals. Now, this goes against the EU's own designation, which says that China is all at once a partner, a competitor, and a rival.
So NATO was created to defend North America and Europe from the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So why are we seeing the focus shift to China?
This is a question that's been asked quite a lot over the last few days because, as you said, China is not in the North Atlantic. It wasn't in the original charter of NATO back in 1949. Now, when asked this, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, as well as a number of the leaders of NATO, of the 30 NATO countries, said that they're not going to China. China's coming to us. The language that they used. They say that we see China more and more in cyberspace. We see China in the Arctic. We encounter China in Africa. So the sense that NATO's trying to put out there is that they're countering Chinese aggression. They're seeing China more in their backyard.
China has said that the West is pushing a Cold War mentality. Is what we've seen over this last week playing into that narrative?
Well, I mean, it certainly plays into the narrative. One thing I'd say is that they've been very keen to say that this is not a new Cold War. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. The actions and the words certainly point to more rivalry and a bit of polarization. But when asked directly, is this a new Cold War? Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, says certainly not. That we still don't consider China an adversary. We still want to partner with China on issues such as climate change, such as cyber. Then, on the other hand, Boris Johnson also come out and said, nobody wants to get into a Cold War with China, a new Cold War. But this is obviously what China's taking is, or at least the message that China is trying to get out there, that this is certainly the aims of NATO, of the G7, of the EU, the US. China accuses the US of peddling this Cold War mentality, but the members of NATO, the members of G7 they suggest otherwise. However, I mean, there's no denying that this week marks a seismic shift in which we're certainly seeing new levels of polarization, new levels of division that we didn't see as last week even. So I think that certainly things are shaping up to present a sort of polar version of the world.
Finbarr, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Alkira.